Homologous structures. Homologous structures are anatomically similar structures with different functions. Let's take an example of a whale and a human. Both have bones of the forearm in a similar position. But these bones have two very different functions. In humans, these bones are used to move the arm, the wrist, and to pick up things. And in the whale, these bones are used for swimming. So when we talk about homologous structures, we're really discussing divergent evolution, which is a key term used when discussing homologous structures because it helps us understand that the reason these organisms have such similar structures is because they inherited from a common ancestor millions of years ago. And one way to differentiate homologous structures from analogous structures is because you need to remember that the prefix homo means the same. And what is the same about them? They have the same structure and shape, or anatomy. The bat, the bird, and the fly. What do these organisms have in common? Well, if you guess that they all have wings to fly, you're correct. Are they closely related? Well, they are related, but not very closely. Certainly not as closely as a human is to a chimpanzee, or as a zebra and a giraffe are related. But then, what makes these organisms important? In this lesson, we're going to learn what it means to have an analogous structure. We're going to give an example, and we're going to discuss why these structures are important to understanding evolution. First, an analogous structure, as opposed to a homologous structure, so put opposite, are anatomically different. But what does that mean? Well, if we were to compare the wing of a bat, or a bird, or that of a fly, or a butterfly perhaps, these wings would be made of very different internal parts. So their parts are different. One is made of bone, and the other is made of maybe more pliable connective tissue and proteins. These organisms' wings are analogous because although they have different anatomies, their functionality or their physiology is similar. So they have similar purpose. For example, they can all fly. So why are these structures important? Analogous structures are noticed as part of what's commonly deemed among scientists convergent evolution. When two roads converge, they come together. Same thing here. In biological terms, convergent evolution states that although certain populations of organisms have very distant common ancestors, they may still evolve to employ similar traits due to a similar adaptation in their environment. So it's important to remember the difference between analogous structures and homologous structures. Analogous structures are anatomically different, whereas homologous structures are anatomically similar, such as the bones in a whale flipper and a human arm. However, analogous structures have similar purpose. They all fly, or they all use these structures to walk or for the immune system or whatnot. And in homologous structures, they have different purposes. So it's going to be important to remember those two structures and their definitions. Good luck. One major piece of evidence for evolution is something known as vestigial structures. Vestigial structures are basically any structure in an organism that is no longer functional, not functioning as it once had, or perhaps unnecessary. These can be organs, behaviors, neurological pathways, and many disappear during the development of an embryo. The most important things we learn from vestigial structures is that they give major hints as to the evolution of organisms or the evolutionary history of the organism. Let's go through a few examples. In humans, some popular vestigial structures include the coccyx or the tailbone, wisdom teeth, and our appendix, right here. We could choose any one of these structures and discuss what the original purpose was and why it has reduced in structure, or in other words, become smaller or less pronounced. My favorite is the whale pelvis. So this is a whale up here on the right. Why would a whale with a long tail and fins to swim have a floating pelvis inside of them? Great question. Since a pelvis is used for walking, and all whales are born with this structure, they must have also walked at some point in their evolutionary history. Now that they live in the ocean, this is no longer necessary. But it once was, which is why it is called a vestigial structure. Also, you could take a look at the human appendix. The human appendix sometimes becomes inflamed, causing appendicitis, and is most certainly a remnant of the need for added help during digestion. This added help is likely to have immune system function. For instance, before humans discovered fire, they were unable to cook their food. The appendix probably helped defend humans against dangerous bacteria or other organisms that we are less likely to be in contact with today. So we'll put immune system function. One way to remember that a vestigial structure is a reduced form of a once quite helpful and prominent structure is to think of a man's suit vest. Not a great illustrator, but here's a little vest, the buttons. It's an article of clothing that traces back to the past. Back in the early 1900s, men wore typically three-piece suits that included vests. Today, these suits may seem a bit unnecessary or extraneous, too formal perhaps, but the vest, just like a vestigial structure, can be said to be from the past. And this can help us understand what men and perhaps women preferred back then. So this can help us understand vestigial, this word vestige, or remnant of the past, to understand that we have organs and structures and neurological pathways in our body that are remnants from the past. Don't forget to practice the difference between this powerful paleontological evidence for evolution and other major examples of evidence for evolution, including comparative anatomical evidence, embryological evidence, and molecular evidence. So where else is there evidence for evolution? Well, a great deal of evidence for confirming the relatedness of all organisms can be found using techniques used in comparative embryology. Comparative embryology is the study of embryos and their development in different animals. And comparative embryology helps to determine evolutionary relationships in nature. Usually a comparative embryologist, is a doctor or a researcher who studies comparative embryology. He or she examines the growing embryos at various stages of their development. These here on the right are fetuses, but a comparative embryologist may study the early ball of cells called a blastocyst and their development into an embryo, and then finally their development into the last stage of development inside an organism's parent called the fetus. Notes on these comparisons can inform evolutionary biologists not only of the relatedness of different species, but also to the key developmental pathways or how we might be able to understand embryonic development due to the similarity in their formation in the womb. Ultimately, this knowledge can help us prevent or even cure disease. So it's important to remember that this important bank of evidence for evolution, or one important bank of evidence for evolution, is in fact stems from embryological evidence.